Laremy Tunsil has been traded by the Houston Texans.
Ooh, what up, H-Town? Hey, how we doing?
What was that?
Do we have the real breaking news sound
But-
effect too instead of Lance?
You don't
with
like
a
the
hernia?
Lance breaking news
Oh,
sound?
that was Lance?
That's the Lance with a hernia, Minnesota Vikings.
That's the Lance
All
breaking
right,
news.
we don't have time for all this. Laremy Tunsil has been traded. The Texans have traded Laremy Tunsil. Joe
Hello.
George couldn't contain himself. Was running down the hall, kind of like Rich Eisen running the 40.
I don't know
run's
about
a
run.
loose term.
He was doing this thing. His fists were above his head.
It was kind of like Tiger Woods' celebration with Joe in motion.
The real Adam Schefter has tweeted, the Texans are trading 5-time Pro Bowl offensive tackle Laremy Tunsil to the Washington Commanders for a package of picks. Sources tell ESPN. So that's all that we know right now. Like what the picks are, well, I'm sure that will come out here in a moment. But what is your reaction to Laremy Tunsil being traded by the Houston Texans?
Shocked right off the top. Just shocked because of the fact that I thought that no matter what he did or didn't do or how much I was critical of him, especially even last season, that I didn't think he was going anywhere. I thought that, the most people's consensus was he's still a top 10 left tackle in this league, if not top 5. And with the contract and the money that he's making, that he was solidified as being a Houston Texan. This is a massive move for the Texans. And regardless of whatever they get back, the biggest thing to me now is, okay, now we really need to see some movement on the offensive line. We need to figure out what you're trying to figure out, and please kind of clear it up for us a little bit as to what the plan is going forward, because they haven't done anything on the offensive line yet. And now, yeah, you got a couple guys internally that could do some things, but my goodness, this is crazy.
We have the terms. Would you like to hear the terms before?
No, real quick.
Okay.
My feeling on this is that they don't love his attitude because he was still a really good football player. But like we always hear a lot of times that, the offensive line's about cohesion. It's about 5 guys connecting as one. It's about the fist, not the fingers. He was a really good football player. This to me reads as that they don't love his attitude. They don't think he's a dog. They don't love his leadership in that room. And that's the reason that they didn't play as a great offensive line despite him playing really well. Plus, he doesn't help his quarterback off the ground after he gives up a sack. Or they were just blown away with the trade offer that the Washington Commanders sent them. So let us hear it.
The terms, the TLDR, they get a second and a third. But the terms in full are a second and a fourth rounder next year, plus a third rounder this year. Texans send a fourth rounder along with Laremy to Washington.
Fourth rounder this year?
Fourth rounder doesn't say which year it is. Just says a fourth rounder.
So they get a second and a third.
Yeah, because they swap force,
right.
and it's a second. So it's a second and third, but you get a second next year and a third this year. Is essentially what the Texans get.
Well, and you escape from all that money, right?
Yeah, the biggest thing was obviously we know what their salary cap situation has been. So, and then obviously the leadership thing also plays into a huge factor into it. But a second and a third.
Yeah, I think that, and I think it goes back to, and again, kind of like with Slowick and everything that we saw with the offensive line. It goes back to early in the season when between the penalties, the false starts, and then the kind of deflection of he didn't really want to take ownership on it first. And he was, like Jeremy said, he was into it. This is the continuity of all of us and things like that. And there's obviously several other times where we were like, come on, man.
What's the ownership thing, though? Like that kind of raise an eyebrow to that. What do you mean he didn't take ownership to the false starts? Like he had like 5 straight weeks of not having false starts after he had
because right after it happened, when he had 8 penalties in a game, he didn't want to own it himself. He wanted his first comments were about it's easy to blame it on one person, but it's really about the continuity of the entire line. And I thought he was deflecting it.
I mean, he got really good at avoiding them for a long stretch after that.
Okay.
I don't like the accountability thing. I don't know if that's true. We don't even know if like the leadership thing is true. Now we know that the Texans are trading him whenever he was a really good football player last year. This is a far cry for what they gave up for him too, by the way. Not that should be used against Caserio in any way. Like, I feel like players don't get traded for nearly as much as they used to because general managers have kind of wisened up on, one, it costs a lot to acquire the player. And then secondly, you have to pay them, which obviously impacts your cap space and stuff like that. But the Texans traded 2 firsts for Laremy Tunsil. And now you're getting a second and third for him. What is it, 6-7 years later?
2 firsts and a second.
Yeah, and this is what, 6-7 years later, you get a second and a third. So, like, you still got a lot of good play there in the meantime while you had him because he was a good left tackle. Like, we could all have our opinions on why we don't like Laremy Tunsil. Nonchalant, very chill. Maybe he wasn't a dog. Maybe he didn't take accountability. Maybe he's not a good leader. Maybe he didn't help his quarterback off the ground whenever he gave up a sack. Maybe he tried to get me fired once upon a time late last year whenever he was in my mentions. He was a really good football player. Like, there is no doubt about that, in my opinion, that Laremy Tunsil was really good. Easily a top 10 left tackle in the NFL, arguably top 5-ish left tackle in the NFL. And for a team that is desperate for offensive line help and improving the offensive line, to trade your best performer is startling. It's alarming. That, to me, tells me a lot about what they feel about him as a leader, as a dog. The cap savings, too. That is significant. That is a significant thing here because they're saving nearly $14 million by trading Laremy Tunsil. Just looking at over the cap, I think it's $14 million. It says that they trade him pre-June 1st. The cap savings $13.8 million. So they're going to save about $14 million, which maybe that allows you to sign another offensive lineman. This is shocking. I didn't see this coming. Like we kicked this around, like trading Tunsil, like early in the year, maybe even towards the end of the year. I didn't, in my wildest imagination, expect them to trade Laremy Tunsil. I thought they would try to build around Laremy Tunsil.
And exactly, that's what I was thinking. He's still your best offensive lineman, and we talked about how many changes do we think we were going to see on the offensive line. I don't think any of the three of us thought that one of the changes we would see is that Laremy Tunsil would no longer be a Texan. And I think that, again, kind of like we were kind of led to believe with Bobby, that's why I was saying what I was saying, kind of like what we were led to believe with Bobby and everything on the offensive side of the coaching staff. It was like, you're protecting them and you're moving on and you're staying positive, and it didn't seem like it was in that big of a dire straight situation. And then they fired him and they cleared house. Strausser as well. This one seems to me like, look, that early in the season and with everything with Tunsil, they're not going to sit there and throw him under the bus, and they're going to deal with it for the rest of the season. But maybe you're right. Maybe at the end of the year they were like, hey, come on, man, we're not going to do this for another year. And we're going to do things a different way.
I'm pretty shocked.
It was surprising, to say the least.
I'm pretty shocked. Like, you would think that you would build around Laremy Tunsil for an offensive line that was towards the bottom of the NFL.
Yeah, but now, to your point, what I was going to throw back at you just to see what you think, but there is depreciation, right? Like, from what you gave up to get him, he's a different football player than he was back then. Back then, when you got him, he was arguably one of the top 2 left tackles, 2 or 3 top left tackles in the league.
I don't feel like there's been a whole lot of slippage from whenever you got him.
He's obviously older.
Like, I think whenever you got him, he was still kind of blocked. Like, I feel like he wasn't quite living to his potential yet. And I feel like he kind of hit his peak. I haven't seen a whole lot of slippage though from him. I still think he's pretty similar to the player that you acquired.
Yeah, he's older. You don't know how much more he's got left.
He's only 30.
Okay.
Yeah, offensive linemen don't age as quickly as wide receivers or running backs. He could be Pro Bowl level for whatever that's worth for another 3-4 years. I don't think that's. Andrew. How long did Andrew Whitworth play? I mean, obviously different players, but same position. Guy played so.
Joe Thomas. There's a lot of guys.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys.
You're right. No, you guys are right on that. I'm just saying, we don't know what we don't know again. But this seems like, hey, and from the flip side of it, Washington's in straight go for it mode. I mean, everything that they're doing right now is they're putting all their chips in the middle of the table while they have a quarterback on a rookie deal because they have been active in free agency and trades. They're doing whatever they can. They got Debo. This seems like they're going for it all out. Don't care about any, they'll figure everything out as they go. And the Texans seem like between the cap savings and whatever we don't know, that they're going to totally reconstruct this offensive line.
It's startling. Like, who's your left tackle right now? Assuming that you don't bring in a new left tackle.
It's either Fisher or
Titus
Howard.
Yeah, I think it's got to be.
Are those your 2 tackles going into next year?
Let's hope not.
Titus Howard and Blake Fisher, your 2 tackles, and
as of now,
that's an improvement to what your offensive line was
last
year.
Hope.
I wonder if this.
Let's hope not. As of now, you're right, but let's hope that this opens the door for them to find another left tackle as well as whatever they're looking for.
We're obviously kind of spitballing what happened because we're reacting, minutes after it happened. But this either strikes me as they decided they love someone in the draft and they're willing to go ahead and take the cap savings and take the picks they get for him and move up to get him, which I don't think that's it. If that feels like a bit of a risky move to go immediately to a rookie there.
Yeah, and you can't guarantee
and you
what's going
can't
to happen
guarantee
in
you
the
get
draft.
the guy. Or I don't think he's dropped off a lot, but maybe they're looking at this, and this is probably a crazy idea, but maybe they're looking at this and thinking, well, we had a terrible offensive line with them. Why are we putting up with his nonsense if we're terrible with them? Let's go ahead and take a step back, save the cap money, get some picks, and rework this entire offensive line with someone who fits maybe our swarm mentality more than Laremy Tunsil does.
It's kind of the old adage: we lost 100 games with him, we can lose 100 games without him. I forget the player that was quoted to.
To me, the whole thing, when you look at it, is like, what. I heard your scenarios, Brian. I don't want to think about a rookie going to left tackle to protect CJ.
I don't think it would as of now.
Yeah, that's cringeworthy to me.
It'd be Fisher or Howard.
If
Probably
there's a veteran out there, whether it be trade-wise or otherwise, free agency, I would hope that there's a veteran to play left tackle or you trust one of your guys. But I don't want a rookie at left tackle.
Yeah, I think that to me that the first scenario is very unlikely. Like Casario's talked openly about that too. Like we can't go into the draft expecting to get a certain player, especially now, especially whenever they have the 25th pick. Like whenever you were drafting number 2 or number 3, you had a pretty good idea of the player that was going to be there or the cost associated with going up in the draft. I don't think Casario loves some tackles so much in the draft that he's trading Laremy Tunsil. I think this is more about. I think your second part is good one. It was Ralph Kiner too. I think Branch Rickey did it. Branch Rickey, where did we finish? Last. I replied. Well, Rickey said we can finish last without you. So the Houston Texans have a bottom 3 offensive line in the NFL with a very good left tackle in Laremy Tunsil. Well, if we can do it with you, we can do it without you. I think this is more of a. We need our 5 to be really solid as opposed to 1 being really good. Now, it does kind of scare you about who's going to play left tackle because your 2 options are Titus Howard and Blake Fisher. Both of them, like, there's a pretty good chance that they're both your starting tackles next year, right? Like, there's probably greater than a 50% chance that Titus Howard and Blake Fisher are your starting tackles.
Yeah, because I think the guard market as far as free agency goes is full right guard. So, I mean, yeah, unless you want a rookie tackle playing, then it's probably Fisher and Howard, and then you're filling out your guard positions.
Especially, like, you're not going to sign a free agent, I don't think, at big
not a
money.
Tackle, I don't think so.
Yeah,
No.
like,
tackles are expensive in free agency.
It might be closer to a 75% chance that your starting tackles next year are Titus Howard and Blake Fisher.
Quickly, there is an update from Schefter on the terms here. So the Texans' 4th-round pick they're sending to Washington is in 2025. The 4th rounder they're getting back is in 2026, and they're apparently getting a 7th-round pick in this year, 2025.
So they're so the 2nd and 3rd rounder are both this year, or the 3rd round is next year?
The 3rd rounder they get is this year. 2nd rounder is next year. 4th rounder.
So they don't even add a 2nd rounder this year? That's a 2026 pick?
Yeah, the 2nd rounder is 2026.
What do you think of the return?
The only thing they get back this year is a 3rd and a 7th, and then 26 they get a 2nd and a 4th. But they send out a 4th
this year.
The return kind of tells me that it was a dump out.
I wouldn't. That's too far. A dump out, I think, is too far.
Well, but
they don't get much this year, though. They move up basically from the 4th round to the 3rd round.
Weak draft. Better draft next year.
Yeah, but I also think that it just seems like. Do you think that they were shopping him, or this was just like more like, hey?
I hope that they were shopping him.
I hope so.
Like if you're a general manager and you're committed to trading a player and you only call one team, then you're an awful general manager.
I mean, so
Tunsil's too good not to shop.
Yeah, if they're not. If the Commanders called him and they're like, hey, this is what we're getting, and then Casario didn't talk to anybody else, Nick Casario is a moron. I don't believe that happened.
What do you think they could have gotten a 1?
Clearly not.
I guess not.
I'm pretty confident that every general manager calls every team.
The only way I would say maybe they could have gotten a 1 is if, I mean, we always hear, I don't know how much Casario cares about this, but the scenario of like, I don't want to trade him in the conference, I don't want to trade him in the division. Yeah. I could see a scenario where maybe someone offered you to 1, but it's the Jaguars or the Titans, and you said screw that.
That's a good point. Which I'm never a big proponent for that, but I do understand that people think along those lines. I think the return's pretty meh. I wouldn't call it. Would you call it a dump out? Because like it's not a salary dump. Like you get a 2nd round pick. 2nd round picks are valuable.
But you're dumping out of all that salary. So and we knew that they had to do something financially to clear some space.
Yeah.
So as part of being able to do that and Washington being able to accommodate and they get the tackle that they want, that you don't get as much.
Yeah, I think that this is the best they could have gotten, unless somebody in division like had a better offer. I don't think that I don't think Nick Caserio took the first bid. I really don't believe that. I'm not over the moon about the return. Like I'm not a huge Laremy Tunsil guy. You get a second and a third for a top 7 left tackle in football that are in high demand, and your offensive line was bad.
Yeah.
Like, it's a pretty meh return. I am very interested to see what Nick Caserio does with the cap savings, though.
Yeah, I mean, look, and he was trying to restructure more than just Nico, and he was trying to get creative to do a lot of things to get some money to play with. Well, you got more money to play with now, but now you really got to get creative with it, because now almost more than likely you're going to get 2 new faces on that offensive line this year.
Like, if he uses the cap savings and is able to get a starting interior offensive lineman that's really good, okay, I feel a little bit better about the trade, because now you trade a starter for a starter. I mean, obviously a great left tackle for who knows how good of an interior offensive lineman. You then, like, because we were talking about Titus Howard and Blake Fisher both starting on this offensive line anyways, like Titus Howard at left guard, Blake Fisher at right tackle. So if you could use the savings and then bring in a starting offensive lineman, and then on top of that, you added a 3rd rounder this year, a 2nd rounder next year, okay, it looks a little bit better. But the return, I don't think, is fantastic. I think it's pretty meh.
And with everything that you just said, my biggest concern is the most important position on the offensive line to protect your quarterback is left tackle.
Yeah.
And I don't know who's playing it, and I don't know how good I feel about the guys they have in-house to play it.
I think this is pretty telling on how they feel about Laremy Tunsil in the locker room. Not that he's like a cancer, but that he's not like this leader, this alpha, this, dog of a football player. I think it's pretty telling on that front.
I think it's the body of work, too, since he's been here, because remember, and Lance had the reports, and he had talked about the fact that, when he had essentially a hangnail, but he had a thumb issue, and he wanted to sit out the rest of the season. He wanted to sit out like 10 games, and they had to basically bribe him and coerce him to coming back to play because they weren't going to be a playoff team. That's kind of telling in terms of what you're talking about. A leader in the locker room, a veteran that everybody's looking up to that's going to set the example. He's never seemed to come across as that kind of guy.
Yeah. 713-780-ESPN. A lot of the Hive wants to weigh in on this. We'll get your reaction. Laremy Tunsil has been traded by the Houston Texans.